Seriously, you showed up wearing that?" Her laughter cut through the restaurant like a verdict delivered without mercy. Mara Ellington pushed back her chair so hard the metal legs screeched against marble, and the sound made half the dining room turn to stare. She stood there in her designer dress, diamonds glittering at her ears, looking down at the man across from her like he was something unpleasant she had stepped in. A maintenance guy. Her well-connected friends had set her up with a maintenance guy. Marcus Ward did not chase her. He did not argue or explain or defend himself. He simply placed enough cash on the table to cover both their meals, stood with the quiet dignity of a man who had survived far worse than public humiliation, and walked out into the cool Charleston evening. He did not know that tomorrow, in this same building, smoke would fill the air and panic would spread like wildfire. He did not know that her father would watch him move through chaos with the precision of someone trained for exactly this kind of moment. And he certainly did not know that a powerful man would stand at attention and offer him something far more valuable than any apology. 6 hours earlier, Marcus stood in front of the bathroom mirror in his small apartment on the east side of Charleston, trying to convince himself that the evening ahead would not be a complete disaster. The face staring back at him was weathered beyond its 36 years, carved with the kind of lines that came from squinting into foreign suns and sleeping in places where rest was never guaranteed. His dark hair was still kept military short out of habit, even though it had been 5 years since he had worn the uniform. Old habits died hard when they had kept you alive. He examined the one decent shirt hanging on the back of the bathroom door. It was flannel, clean and pressed, but still flannel. Not exactly the kind of thing that impressed women at expensive restaurants, but it was the best he had. And Marcus had learned long ago that pretending to be something he was not never ended well. "Daddy, are you nervous?" He turned to find Lily standing in the doorway, her 7-year-old frame wrapped in pajamas covered with cartoon dinosaurs that she refused to outgrow. Her blonde hair was tangled from sleep, sticking up in several directions at once, and she clutched a piece of paper against her chest like it contained state secrets. Marcus crouched down to her level, feeling the familiar ache in his left knee where shrapnel had once lodged itself during a night in Kandahar that he tried very hard not to remember. The doctors at Walter Reed had removed most of it, but some pieces were too deep, too close to nerves and tendons that mattered. He had learned to live with the pain the same way he had learned to live with everything else that followed him home from the war. "Maybe a little," he admitted, reaching out to smooth a strand of hair from her face. "It has been a long time since Daddy went on a date." Lily's eyes widened with the kind of concern that no 7-year-old should carry, but she had been carrying it since the day they buried her mother 4 years ago. The car accident had stolen Sarah from them both on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, a drunk driver running a red light while Sarah was on her way home from the grocery store. Marcus had been at work when the call came, and his whole world had collapsed into a hospital waiting room that smelled like antiseptic and grief. Lily had been 3 years old, too young to understand why Mommy was not coming home, but old enough to feel the absence like a wound that would not heal. They had gotten through it together, the two of them against the world, building a new life from the wreckage of the old one. "I made you something," Lily announced, thrusting the paper toward him with the solemnity of a knight offering a sacred talisman. Marcus took it with careful hands, handling it like the priceless treasure it was. It was a card, drawn in crayon with the fierce concentration that Lily brought to all her artwork. A stick figure man with brown hair stood next to a stick figure woman with yellow hair and a big smile. Above them, in Lily's careful, wobbly letters, "Good luck, Dad." Surrounding the words were dozens of yellow stars, each one colored with such determination that the crayon had left grooves in the paper. Marcus felt his throat tighten. "It is perfect, sweetheart. Absolutely perfect. Mommy would want you to be happy," Lily said softly, her voice carrying the weight of wisdom that no child her age should possess. "She told me once, before she went to heaven, that you deserved someone who could see how special you are. She made me promise to remind you." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Sarah had said that to him too, near the end of her life, during the long hours in the hospital when they both pretended they had more time than they did. She had made him promise to keep living after she was gone, to stay open to happiness, to let someone else in eventually. He had kept most of his promises to her. This one had been the hardest. "No matter what happens tonight," Marcus said, pulling Lily into a hug and breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "You are still the most important person in my world. You know that, right? Nothing changes that." Lily nodded against his shoulder, her small arms squeezing around his neck. "I know, Daddy, but I want you to have someone too. Someone nice who makes you smile the way Mommy used to. Someone nice." Such a simple request from a child who had already learned that the world was not always kind. Mrs. Patterson from next door arrived at 6 o'clock to watch Lily. She was a retired school teacher with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, a widow herself who understood loss without needing it explained. She had been watching Lily since the funeral, showing up whenever Marcus needed her, refusing payment and saying it gave her life purpose to help them. Marcus kissed his daughter goodbye at the door, promising ice cream tomorrow if she went to bed on time. Lily waved from the window as he climbed into his truck, a 15-year-old Ford pickup with rust spots along the wheel wells and an engine that complained loudly in cold weather. The truck was not much to look at, but it ran reliably, and in Marcus's experience, reliability mattered more than appearances. Things that looked pretty on the outside often broke when you needed them most. The drive to Ellington Grand Mall took 20 minutes through Charleston's evening traffic. The city's historic streets glowed with warm lamplight, ancient oaks draped with Spanish moss creating tunnels of green above the roads. Marcus had grown to love this place over the past 2 years, its slow rhythms and deep roots so different from the chaos he had known in combat zones halfway around the world. The irony was not lost on him that his blind date had chosen the restaurant inside the very building where he worked. For 2 years, Marcus had walked these halls as a maintenance technician, invisible to the shoppers and diners who passed him without a second glance. He knew this building better than he knew most things. Every pipe that carried water, every wire that carried electricity, every air duct that circulated climate-controlled air. He had fixed the plumbing in the fancy restaurant twice last month alone, crawling through cramped spaces that most people did not know existed. But tonight, he was not entering through the service corridor with its flickering fluorescent lights and concrete floors worn smooth by decades of work boots. Tonight, he walked through the main entrance like a guest, his work boots replaced with the only dress shoes he owned, black leather, scuffed at the toes, purchased for Sarah's funeral and worn exactly twice since. The marble floors felt strange under his feet, too smooth and polished for someone accustomed to rougher terrain. The restaurant was called Lumiere, which Marcus knew meant light in French, though he suspected the prices would leave his wallet feeling considerably darker. Crystal chandeliers cascaded from a ceiling painted with clouds and cherubs. White tablecloths covered tables set with more silverware than Marcus knew the purpose for. Waiters in black vests and bow ties moved between tables with choreographed precision. Mara Ellington was already seated when the hostess led him to the table. She was beautiful in the way that magazine covers were beautiful, polished to perfection, every detail precisely arranged. Her dark hair fell in waves over the shoulders of a black dress that fit like it had been tailored specifically for her body. Diamond studs glittered at her ears. Her nails were painted a deep red that matched her lipstick, and her makeup was flawless. She sat with the absolute confidence of someone who had never been told she did not belong anywhere. When she looked up and saw Marcus approaching in his flannel shirt and scuffed dress shoes, her expression shifted through several stages. Anticipation flickered to confusion. Confusion hardened to disappointment. Disappointment settled into something that looked almost like resignation. "Marcus," she said his name, like a question she already knew the answer to. "That's me." He pulled out his chair and sat down, acutely aware that every movement felt clumsy under her scrutiny. "You must be Mara. It is nice to meet you." She did not return the sentiment. Instead, Her gaze traveled over his appearance with the efficiency of a scanner cataloging inventory. "Jessica said you worked in the building industry," Mara said slowly, each word carefully measured. "Building maintenance, technically." Marcus tried a smile. "I am a technician here, actually, at this mall." Something flickered across Mara's face. Disbelief first, then irritation. Then the dawning realization that her well-meaning friend had set her up with the hired help. Not just hired help, but the man who fixed the toilets and adjusted the thermostats in her father's own building. "You work here? In this building? Like fixing things? Pipes, HVAC systems, electrical issues. Whatever needs attention to keep the place running." Mara reached for her water glass and took a long drink. When she set it down, her smile was tight and thin, the kind of expression people use when they are being polite about something they find deeply distasteful. "That is practical." The conversation that followed limped forward like a wounded animal struggling across hostile terrain. Mara asked questions with decreasing interest, her attention drifting to her phone between his answers, her eyes wandering to other tables where other couples seemed to be having more successful evenings. Marcus tried to find something they might connect on. He mentioned Lily, talked about how the maintenance job allowed him flexible hours to be there for her school events and art shows and parent-teacher conferences, how he could pick her up when she got sick and be home for dinner every night. "Flexible scheduling is important when you are raising a child alone," he explained, watching Mara's eyes glaze over with polite disinterest. "Being present for her matters more to me than climbing any career ladder. I want her to know I will always show up when she needs me." Mara glanced at her phone screen again. "That is sweet." She did not mean it. The word landed like a dismissal. Marcus recognized this dynamic. He had encountered it before, in officers who looked at enlisted men like they were furniture, useful but interchangeable. He had seen it in civilians who thanked veterans for their service with the same tone they used to thank baristas for coffee. He had hoped that a blind date might be different, that someone might be willing to look past the job title and see the person beneath, that someone might recognize that calloused hands meant honest work, not failure. Lily's card was still in his wallet, pressed against his heart. Those hopeful yellow stars surrounded her wish for his happiness. The waiter appeared to take their orders. Mara ordered a salad with dressing on the side and sparkling water with a slice of lemon. Marcus scanned the menu for prices and ordered the chicken because it was the cheapest entree that would not look embarrassingly frugal. When the waiter retreated, Mara leaned forward slightly. "So, what exactly does a maintenance technician do all day? Unclog toilets?" There was cruelty in the question, deliberately sharpened and delivered with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Sometimes. Mostly, I make sure the building functions properly. Climate control systems, electrical infrastructure, plumbing networks, safety equipment, the kind of work that nobody notices unless something goes wrong." "Right." Mara's smile thinned until it was more blade than welcome. Invisible work for invisible people. The words landed harder than she probably intended. Marcus had spent years being invisible, behind enemy lines where being seen meant death, in observation posts where stillness was the difference between survival and a bullet. Invisibility had been his greatest asset, the skill that had kept him alive through situations most people could not imagine. But hearing it used as an insult, here in this restaurant where he had crawled through ceiling spaces to fix air conditioning and replaced faulty wiring to prevent electrical fires, it stirred something old and weary in his chest. Not anger exactly, but a deep exhaustion with people who measured worth by titles and salaries and the labels on their clothes. He thought about Lily, her hopeful stars, her small voice saying she wanted him to find someone nice. This was not nice. Before the food arrived, Mara pushed back her chair. The metal legs scraped against the marble floor with a harsh sound that made nearby tables fall silent and turn to look. "I am sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all, "but this is not going to work." Marcus did not respond. He simply waited, the way he had learned to wait through ambushes when movement meant death, through artillery strikes when the only option was to hold your position, through the long, sleepless nights after Sarah died when grief threatened to swallow him whole. Stillness had saved his life countless times. It would serve him now. Mara laughed. The sound cut through the restaurant's ambient murmur like glass shattering. Seriously? You showed up wearing that? I cannot do this. I am not having dinner with a maintenance guy, pretending it is a date. The entire section of the restaurant went silent. Forks paused midway between plates and mouths. Every eye within 30 feet turned toward the scene. A beautiful woman in designer clothes publicly humiliating a man in flannel, delivering her verdict with the certainty of someone who had never questioned her right to judge. Marcus felt the heat of all those stares, but did not flinch. He had been shot at by people trying to kill him. He had held dying friends in his arms, feeling their blood soak through his uniform, while he promised them things he could not deliver. Public embarrassment did not even register on the scale of things that could break him. Mara turned on her expensive heels and walked away, each step clicking against the marble like a small hammer delivering judgment. She was already pulling out her phone, her laughter echoing through the restaurant as she disappeared through the ornate doors. Marcus sat alone at the table for a moment, letting the silence settle around him. A waiter approached hesitantly. "Sir? Can I get you anything?" Marcus shook his head, pulled out his wallet, and counted out enough cash to cover both meals plus a generous tip. The waitstaff should not suffer for Mara's cruelty. As he stood, his fingers brushed against Lily's card tucked in the billfold. The walk to his truck felt longer than usual, the evening air cool against his face. The humiliation itself was not what wounded him. He had endured far worse. What hurt was imagining Lily's face tomorrow morning, her hopeful questions, the moment when he would have to admit that her stars and her wishes had not been enough. He drove home with the radio off, letting the familiar rumble of the engine fill the silence. The apartment was quiet when he got home. Mrs. Patterson met him at the door, her eyebrows rising as she took in his early return, but she was kind enough not to comment. Lily fell asleep about an hour ago. "Is everything all right?" "Fine," Marcus lied. "Thank you for watching her." After Mrs. Patterson left, Marcus stood in the small kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. On its door, Lily had taped her drawings with alphabet magnets. A rainbow, a house, a portrait of the two of them holding hands under a yellow sun. He did not cry. He had not cried since Sarah's funeral. But the hurt was there, pressing against his ribs, not because of wounded pride, but because Lily had wanted this for him. She had believed the world might finally give her father something soft. Later, after checking on his sleeping daughter and pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, Marcus sat on the edge of his bed in the darkness. He had faced worse. He had survived worse. Tomorrow would come, and he would still have a job to do and a daughter to raise. But he did not know what tomorrow would actually bring. Morning arrived with gray light filtering through thin curtains and the familiar sound of small feet padding across the floor. Marcus woke before those footsteps reached his door, a habit from his service days when sleeping too deeply could mean never waking up at all. Lily appeared in his doorway, hair tangled, eyes still heavy with sleep. Without a word, she crossed the room and climbed onto the bed, burrowing into his side with the complete trust of a child who had never known her father to be anything but safe. "How was your date?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. Marcus hesitated. "It did not work out, sweetheart." Lily pulled back to study his face with Sarah's blue eyes. "She was not nice to you, was she?" The question carried unexpected weight. No, she was not. Something hardened in his daughter's expression, a look that did not belong on a 7-year-old face. Why not? Sometimes people judge others by things that do not really matter. Jobs, clothes, money. They do not take time to see what is underneath. "That is stupid," Lily declared with the absolute moral clarity of childhood. "You are a hero, Daddy. Mommy always said so. Why do people not see it?" The question pierced something deep. "Real heroes do not need people to see them, baby girl. The ones who did not come home from the war, they are the real heroes. You are not regular, Lily insisted. You are my dad. She hugged him fiercely, and Marcus held her back, letting his daughter's love begin to heal the wounds from last night. I see you, Lily whispered. And that is enough, right? That is more than enough, sweetheart. That is everything. They made breakfast together, scrambled eggs and toast, with orange juice in Lily's favorite cup. Then Marcus dropped her at school, watching her run toward the building with her backpack bouncing, and drove to work. The Ellington Grand Mall loomed ahead, glass and steel gleaming in the morning light. He entered through the service door, stepping into the hidden world of corridors and utility rooms that kept the building running. Brewster, his supervisor, was in the maintenance office with the day's schedule. Morning, Ward. Children's art event in the atrium this afternoon. Make sure the HVAC is balanced so the paintings do not blow away. And there is a sensor on level 3 acting weird. Check it when you get a chance. On level 2, passing behind the administrative offices, Marcus heard Mara's voice through a partially open door. He showed up in a maintenance uniform. Can you imagine? Jessica set me up with the guy who fixes the toilets in my father's building. Laughter from her colleagues. Marcus stood in the corridor, letting the words wash over him. What surprised him was how little they stung now, with Lily's voice still echoing in his mind. You are a hero, Daddy. He kept walking. The children's art event was being set up when Marcus arrived to check the ventilation. Tables covered with butcher paper, bins of crayons and paints, easels for the older kids. Lily would be among them later. The thought made Marcus smile as he adjusted the air vents to ensure the artwork would not be disturbed. On level 3, the sensor Brewster mentioned was indeed acting up, a smoke detector with inconsistent readings. Marcus traced the wiring and found a loose connection near the auxiliary line. Easy to fix, but potentially dangerous if ignored. He also discovered something more concerning, a heat pocket forming behind an insulated panel. Not dangerous yet, but building towards something bad. Around noon, Charles Ellington crossed the main floor, the building's owner, silver hair, commanding presence, heading to the restaurant to meet his daughter for lunch. Marcus saw him from a distance, but their paths did not cross. An hour later, Lily burst into the atrium, her face already smeared with paint from school. She spotted Marcus and ran toward him. Daddy, I am going to paint our building because you help it stay alive. Marcus crouched down and smiled. That sounds perfect. Stay with your instructor, okay? Lily bounded off toward the other children. Marcus watched her go, feeling his heart swell with pride, then returned to his duties. The censor was still nagging at him. His instincts, honed through years of combat, would not let it rest. He climbed back to level 3. The readings were worse now. He opened the access panel and dug deeper, tracing wires behind the wall. The heat pocket was growing. Then he felt it, a subtle vibration through the floor, followed by a distant thud from somewhere above. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Through the building's bones, Marcus sensed something shifting, systems responding to signals they should not be receiving. Smoke began curling down from the ceiling vents. Not much at first, just wisps, barely visible, carrying the acrid scent of something electrical burning. But Marcus had seen smoke like this before, in buildings rigged with improvised explosives, in vehicles moments before they erupted. He knew what it meant. Somewhere above him, something had gone wrong. He abandoned the sensor panel and ran for the stairwell. The smoke thickened as he climbed, not enough to choke, but enough to tell him the source was close. Through the service door, he could hear voices rising from the restaurant level, confusion transforming into alarm, alarm sharpening into the first edges of panic. He burst through the service entrance into a scene of growing chaos. Smoke filled the upper portion of the dining room, drifting from vents that should have been pulling it away instead of pushing it in. The fancy alarm panels along the wall flickered uselessly, receiving conflicting signals from the faulty sensor that confused the entire system. Staff members shouted at each other, trying to locate the source. Diners covered their faces with napkins and stumbled in different directions, searching for exits that were not functioning properly. And near the main exit, an emergency shutter had dropped halfway down and jammed, its metal edge creating a dangerous barrier that trapped guests inside. If it dropped completely, anyone trying to crawl under would be crushed. A mother screamed for her child somewhere in the haze. Two elderly patrons clung to each other near the windows, too disoriented to move. A young busboy had frozen behind the bar, paralyzed with fear, and standing in the middle of it all, face pale, designer clothes already streaked with ash, was Mara Ellington. The woman who had laughed at him last night now stood motionless, her composure completely shattered, unable to decide which direction to move. People pushed past her, but she remained rooted in place, overwhelmed by a situation her privileged life had never prepared her for. Near her, Charles Ellington was trying to take command of the situation, directing staff toward exits, his authoritative voice cutting through some of the chaos. But the jammed shutter and malfunctioning systems fought his every effort. He was a man accustomed to being in control, and the building's rebellion against his orders was visibly frustrating him. Marcus did not hesitate. He moved toward the emergency panel beside the stuck shutter, his training taking over, transforming chaos into terrain that needed to be navigated, problems that needed to be solved. Charles spotted him approaching the panel and shouted a warning. "Don't touch that. The panel is unstable. If you trigger the wrong sequence, the shutter could drop completely." "If I don't fix it," Marcus replied, his voice calm despite the smoke burning his eyes and throat, "it will definitely drop on its own, and anyone trying to crawl under it will be crushed." Something in his tone, the absolute certainty, the complete lack of panic, made Charles stop mid-objection. This was not the voice of a man guessing. This was the voice of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Marcus's hands flew over the override controls, executing sequences that most maintenance technicians never learned and would never need. His fingers moved from memory, from training that had been drilled into him until it became instinct. The shutter groaned, shuddered, fought against the confused signals telling it to close. Then, slowly, it began to rise. "Everybody stay low," Marcus commanded, his voice projecting across the room without shouting, cutting through panic with practiced authority. "Cover your faces and move toward the exit. Together, not alone. Help the person next to you." Years of training took over completely. The chaos around him became familiar terrain, no different from 100 other crisis situations he had navigated in places far more dangerous than a mall restaurant. He was not a maintenance worker anymore. He was something older, something forged in combat zones, something that had been sleeping beneath the surface of his quiet civilian life. People began moving. A waiter snapped out of his paralysis and helped one of the elderly patrons toward the rising shutter. A hostess guided the screaming mother toward her child. Staff members who had been frozen with indecision suddenly found purpose, following the calm instructions of the man in the flannel shirt, as if his voice was the only thing keeping them anchored to sanity. Charles watched with growing recognition. The way this man moved through the smoke, the way he read the room, the way he commanded without commanding, it was not learned in any civilian training program. He had seen this before, in soldiers, in special operators, in men who had walked through fire and emerged transformed. "Who are you?" Charles asked as Marcus passed him, heading toward the kitchen where the smoke was thickest. "Check behind the partition wall," Marcus replied without breaking stride. People hide there when they panic. Charles found himself obeying immediately, something he rarely did with anyone. Behind the decorative partition, he discovered the young busboy, curled into a ball, trembling. Charles knelt beside him, speaking softly, coaxing the terrified young man toward safety. Marcus pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen. The source of the smoke was immediately clear. A grease fire that had been badly handled, combined with a ventilation system that could not decide whether to activate suppression protocols or ignore the conflicting sensor data. The result was smoke being pushed into the dining room instead of evacuated. A chef lay slumped near the prep station, overcome by smoke inhalation. Two line cooks stood helplessly nearby, unsure what to do. "Open the service exit," Marcus ordered. "Get fresh air flowing through here now." The cooks scrambled to obey. Marcus dropped beside the fallen chef, checking his airway with practiced efficiency, positioning him to breathe, guiding him back to consciousness with steady hands and a calm voice. The man's eyes fluttered open, confused, but alive. "Can you walk?" A weak nod. Marcus helped him to his feet and transferred him to the waiting cooks. "Get him outside, fresh air." Then, he turned to the real problem. The heat pocket behind the wall that was feeding confused signals into the entire building's safety system. He grabbed fire-resistant gloves from a nearby station and pried open the access panel he had examined earlier that day. The heat hit him like a physical wall, but he had felt worse. His fingers found the exposed wiring, the degraded insulation that had caused the cascade of malfunctions. Working quickly, ignoring the sweat dripping into his eyes, he stabilized the connection, reset the stove controls, and secured the auxiliary line. The sensor beeped 3 times, then fell silent. The ventilation system shuddered and engaged properly, pulling smoke upward in a strong, continuous flow. The fire suppression indicators stabilized. The crisis was contained, but Marcus's work was not done. There was still someone he needed to reach, someone more important than anyone in this restaurant. He took the stairs 3 at a time, his bad knee screaming in protest with each step. The atrium came into view below, still bright with the children's art event, seemingly untouched by the chaos that had erupted 2 floors above. Parents were beginning to notice the commotion, gathering their children with concerned expressions, but no panic had reached this level yet. And there, standing near her easel with paint-covered hands and wide, worried eyes, was Lily. She saw him at the same moment he saw her. Her small face crumpled with relief, and she ran toward him, throwing herself into his arms with the desperate strength of a child who had been terrified of losing the only parent she had left. "Daddy!" Her voice was muffled against his soot-stained shirt. Everyone was talking about something bad happening upstairs. I was so scared. Marcus knelt and held her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo mixed with paint and crayons. "I am okay. Everything is under control now. Promise? Promise." She pulled back to look at him, her small hands reaching up to cup his soot-streaked face. "You smell like smoke. Had to fix something important. I will tell you about it later." Lily pointed toward her easel where a half-finished painting sat drying. "I painted you inside the building. See? That tiny person is you, making everything work." Marcus felt his throat tighten. Even in her art, his daughter saw him. She understood what he did, the invisible work that kept the world running, in ways that grown adults completely missed. The fire department arrived 15 minutes later, swarming through the building with professional efficiency. Restaurant staff emerged from the stairwell in small groups, many of them seeking out Marcus to offer thanks. Their testimonies spread through the atrium like ripples on water. "He fixed the shutter before it could trap us. He cleared the kitchen and got the chef breathing. He told us exactly what to do. We would have panicked without him." The man in the maintenance uniform had become something unexpected, someone who did not fit the assumptions people made about technicians who fixed pipes and adjusted thermostats. Charles Ellington appeared at the edge of the gathering, his expensive suit now marked with ash and soot. He moved through the crowd with purposeful steps, his sharp eyes fixed on Marcus, who was still kneeling beside Lily. "We were not properly introduced earlier," Charles said, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being heard. "I am Charles Ellington. I own this building." Marcus stood, shifting Lily to his hip. "I know who you are, sir. The staff told me you cleared the kitchen, stabilized the ventilation systems, and manually corrected the emergency shutters before they could trap anyone." Charles's gaze was evaluating, penetrating. "That is not typical maintenance work. It needed to be done. That is not what I mean." Charles stepped closer. Anyone can do what needs to be done. Very few can do it with the level of precision you showed. The way you moved through that crisis, the way you commanded that room, it was not learned in any civilian training program. As Marcus shifted Lily slightly in his arms, his sleeve pulled up, revealing the faded tattoo on his inner forearm, an insignia that most people would not recognize. But Charles Ellington was not most people. The older man's breath caught. His expression changed from curiosity to recognition to something that looked almost like reverence. "That mark," Charles said quietly. "I know what that mark means. You were special operations." Marcus remained silent. "That specific insignia," Charles continued, "you earned it the hard way. Very few men in this country have ever worn that ink. That was a long time ago. Training like that does not fade." Charles's voice grew thick with emotion. "I spent 30 years in federal security. I worked alongside men from units like yours. I know exactly what it takes to earn that tattoo. What you had to survive, what you had to sacrifice." Charles took a step back, his shoulders squared, his chin lifted, and then, with the formal precision of someone who had offered this gesture to very few men in his entire life, he raised his hand to his forehead in a crisp military salute. The atrium fell absolutely silent. Lily looked up at her father with wide eyes, not fully understanding the gesture but sensing its tremendous weight. Mara, who had appeared at the edge of the crowd, watched with an expression of dawning horror. Staff members who had been trading grateful murmurs fell quiet. Even the children at the art tables seemed to hold their breath. "This man prevented a tragedy today," Charles announced, his voice carrying across the atrium. "He led with the kind of training most people in this room cannot begin to imagine. What you witnessed upstairs was not luck. It was not instinct. It was mastery. It was service." Marcus did not return the salute. He was not in uniform anymore, was not the soldier he had once been, but he acknowledged it with a slight nod, a recognition of what Charles was offering. Respect, visibility, truth. Charles lowered his hand slowly. "I have met a lot of men in my career, a lot of men who served their country. Not all of them kept their integrity once the uniform came off." His voice softened, but lost none of its conviction. "You did. You kept it when no one was watching, when no one respected you, when no one believed in you." Mara pushed through the crowd, her face streaked with tears and ash, her designer clothes rumpled and stained. She stopped a few feet from Marcus, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for words that seemed impossibly inadequate. "I did not know," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did not know who you were." Marcus looked at her steadily, his expression neutral. "You did not ask." The simple truth of that statement hit Mara harder than any accusation could have. She flinched, her hands twisting together, her composure completely stripped away. "I judged you by your uniform, by what I assumed your life was, and I was wrong. So completely, unforgivably wrong." Marcus considered her for a moment. This woman who had laughed at him, humiliated him, walked away without a second thought. He could see the regret in her eyes now, genuine and raw. But forgiveness was not something he owed her, and he was not certain it was something he could give. "I do not need your apology," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. "I did not do any of this for recognition. I did it because it needed to be done. Same reason I fix pipes. Same reason I raise my daughter alone. Some things just need doing." Charles nodded with deep respect. "If you ever want a different path, recommendations, connections, opportunities in federal response or specialized training, I will personally make it happen. You have my word." Marcus shook his head without hesitation. "My path is right here, with her." He looked at Lily, who was watching the exchange with solemn attention. "She is the only mission I care about now." "Then she is luckier than most," Charles said. Lily, who had been quiet through the entire exchange, suddenly spoke up. Her voice was clear and certain, carrying the absolute conviction that only children possess. "My daddy is a hero. My mommy always said so. Now everyone can see it." Mara's face crumpled. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Not the dramatic tears of someone performing emotion, but the quiet tears of someone confronting a truth they could not escape. This 7-year-old girl had known something that Mara, with all her education and sophistication and designer clothes, had completely missed. Marcus pressed a kiss to Lily's forehead. "Come on, sweetheart. Let us go home." He walked toward the exit, Lily's arms wrapped around his neck, her half-finished painting tucked under his arm. Behind him, the atrium remained quiet. Dozens of eyes following the man in the flannel shirt as he carried his daughter toward the doors. Charles watched them go, his expression thoughtful. "He saved lives today," he said quietly to his daughter, "and he did not expect a single thank you." Mara did not respond. There was nothing she could say that would undo the laughter, the cruelty, the public humiliation she had inflicted on a man who had deserved none of it. Outside, the afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, casting warm light across the parking lot. Marcus settled Lily into her car seat, carefully securing the straps around her small shoulders. "Daddy?" "Yeah, sweetheart? Can we get ice cream on the way home?" Marcus smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. At the ice cream shop, a small place with faded awnings and a counter sticky from decades of happy customers, they ordered their usual. Chocolate for Lily, vanilla for Marcus, and sat at a picnic table outside, watching the world go by. "Daddy," Lily said between careful licks of her cone, "were you scared up there? In the smoke?" Marcus considered the question carefully. He had learned long ago not to lie to his daughter, even when the truth was complicated. "I was not scared of what was happening," he said slowly. "I was only scared of not getting back to you." Lily nodded as if this made perfect sense. She reached across the table and took his hand, her small fingers sticky with chocolate. "You are my hero," she said simply. "You always come back." Marcus squeezed her hand. "I am just your dad. That is all I need to be." Lily shook her head fiercely. "You are more than that. You are the person who makes everything work. At the mall, at home, everywhere. You make things okay." That night, after Lily fell asleep with her stuffed elephant tucked under her arm, Marcus sat on the edge of his bed in the darkness. The events of the past 2 days played through his mind. The humiliation at the restaurant, the chaos of the fire, the unexpected moment when a powerful man had saluted him in front of everyone. He thought about Mara and her laughter, about the way she had looked at him like he was nothing. He thought about Charles and his salute, about the weight of being truly seen after so long invisible. He thought about Lily, always Lily, and the fierce certainty in her voice when she called him a hero. The truth, he realized, was somewhere in between. He was not the failure Mara had assumed, but he was not the legend Charles's salute implied either. He was simply Marcus Ward, father, technician, survivor, a man who fixed what was broken and protected what he loved. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough. Lily's words echoed in his mind as he drifted toward sleep. "You are my hero, Daddy. You always come back." He smiled in the darkness. He would keep coming back, every single day, for as long as she needed him. That was the only mission that mattered now.